series. I'm Glenn Sharp, and I'm the provost, and it's my great honor tonight to introduce Elizabeth Peterson to you all. And I believe probably everyone in this room knows Elizabeth, but if you don't, I will refresh your memory. She came to us after earning her BA at Wells, magna cum laude, I believe, an MS at Pratt Institute, and after stints at OUMA and directing the gallery at Eastern Connecticut University, she came to Oglethorpe in 2012. Is that right? So 7 years with us.
I have no 7-year itch.
7-year itch, right? In addition to, you all know Elizabeth in her role of directing the museum here, and you see her as our host, being very public. But she also teaches for us regularly, both in our core program in art and culture, and in a museum studies class that this semester has 20 students in it, which is remarkable, I think. I really do think we have a niche here with this museum, with this university, and it's beginning to resonate with our students on campus who are finding connections between this museum and other museums out there through the help of John and Elizabeth. In addition, Elizabeth is a Compass advisor, so she regularly works with first-year students, helping them transition from high school to college. And much of what you see here, I've been here now 5 years, and I've seen tremendous growth and improvement, both in the collection that we have and just in the ambiance of the place, from the furnishings to the room we have here, to the lecture series. And I credit Elizabeth with much of this. So tonight she is going to, I thought she was only going to be talking about the Sande Society, the women of the Mende of Sierra Leone. Thank you. But I think you're also going to be talking about other things as well. So Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you. I always feel like I've accomplished something even before I stood up here. That's so nice. I appreciate it a lot. We always say this, John and I, but it's very true that if we're not here first and foremost for the students, why are we here? And so a lot of what we've done is tried to connect to the students and connect to them through their professors. And just today, I don't even think I got to tell the Metas who are here, whose collection we're talking about. We had Professor Stephen Hirschler, who is teaching about emerging global economies, come back with another class. He makes terrific use of this space. And he persuaded Amanda Hellman to come back, and she wasn't available at any particular time that we needed and wanted, so they changed the entire class time to accommodate Dr. Hellman, who came today and talked to all of them. So they're all very, very inspired. So we're making really good use of what's on view, both our collections and temporary shows. So thank you very much for coming. Yeah, I couldn't help myself. I have one shot at this semester, so I'm talking about a number of different things. And kind of inspired by the way we've been taking people through on tours. So starting with a quick view of a couple of things that inspired the show. And if those of you who have actually come to several of these talks, I know Eula, you're coming to all of them, right? You always do. And Jill, you come to all of them, right? You come to so many of them, so thank you. You may have heard Anne Gohengere talk about the Grandmother Project in West Africa. That's Anne herself, dressed in traditional garb of her country, of Rwanda, hanging out with me, trying to be African as well, during our Hispaniola exhibition a couple of years ago. But it was Anne and talking to Anne that inspired the first little idea of the show, which was something to do with women, something to do with West Africa, and something to do with doing something positive socially to change harmful practices towards girls and women. So the photographs that you see in the hallway, they came in at the end of this whole adventure, which has taken 3 years to gel. But they depict women, older women, young girls, who are benefiting from the Grandmother Project. Hey, Claire. And so they are these are photographs in the hallway that are by a young woman named Tara Rice, who is from Vermont, studied in California, and who made her way back to the East Coast, where she said she thought her interest in art and also her biting sarcasm would be more appreciated, apparently. But in all seriousness, she bases her photographic projects on things that relate to education, gender equality, community service, things that have to do with social outreach. And so Grandmother Project was instantly interesting to her. At the same time all of this was happening, of course, I connected with the Metas. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the photograph that you see on the right, which is in the hallway, that's a little a detail of it, is a woman named Aminata Conte, who she herself was married at 17. So for those of you who are not familiar with Grandmother Project, what it is a Senegalese NGO and a US 501c3 based in Senegal. They do work in also Gambia, the Gambia of Mali, and in Sierra Leone. And they are trying to persuade people to stop these harmful practices like genital mutilation, early marriage, early pregnancy, by getting to the grandmothers. And why the grandmothers and not the grandfathers, which was a question that came up with Anne's lecture, because the grandfathers are not working at home with the children. There's a clear division of labor in most African nations. So the grandmothers are also the ones who usually carry out the clitorectomies and other terrible practices that happen. And those terrible practices happen right alongside beautiful traditions. And so to try to uproot those without addressing the fact that you are flying in the face of hundreds of years of tradition is not effective. And what they've done is to get to the elders, persuade them, and it's not too hard to, apparently, because they themselves have not benefited, to intervene, to get to the next generation, to stop them and say, wait, keep your girl in school, perhaps don't do that, you know. So this particular woman, her role was to speak out again to the parents and to the elders. Okay. Your battery's running low, that's not helpful to me. I didn't bring my charger, so that could be theater death for us right there. Or not. Well, we're just going to look at this image for the entire evening.
Well, this is same like the battery.
Is that yours or special events?
Unfortunately. Will I burn myself in?
Want an iPhone charger?
Plug it in.
I mean, I can plug it in.
You know, fix it.
The set Red Jerome. I don't suppose there'd be anybody in the events.
No, I mean, but they have most of their cords are
I have my
back.
desk, my Dell laptop at my desk right downstairs. Do you want to borrow it?
Yeah, give it a shot.
Please,
Yeah.
sorry.
Nope.
Oh, there's always something. Just when I have it beautifully set up, right? Well, I'll keep talking. All right, well, we've got this pretty image to look at. There's another image in the hallway of a young woman named OUMA, who's from the Medina Diambere village, who is now 18 years old. She had been arranged for marriage since birth, and at age 14, her parents decided it was time. So she was very upset, and she went to the grandmothers in that region and said she thought she wasn't psychologically mature enough for marriage at 14. So she successfully convinced her parents to let her leave. Now, unfortunately, they sent her off to the fields. They couldn't keep her in school. They didn't have enough money to do that. So she works in the fields with her father, and she's still not married. Next year. Okay, so the Grandmother Project, a little bit more about it. They work since 2005 in collaboration with the Belinjara District Education Office in Senegal, with a program entitled Integrating Positive Cultural Values in Schools. So they're not just working with individual families, they're working in schools as well, and with the Ministry of Education in Senegal to try to create culturally relevant and effective teaching for children in a formal school setting. So I think Anne, you may remember, talked about under the tree, discussions under the tree. So they'll bring that around, but they'll also go into a formal school setting and work with young girls. And they're specifically looking at stopping those harmful traditions: child marriage, teen pregnancy, and female genital mutilation. The title of the exhibition, Stories Without an End, came from one of their initiatives called Stories Without an Ending, which is an adult education tool that they use actively to engage community groups in discussions. And we're going to take a little pause and try to make this work. You know what I will do? Go upstairs and write it. For me?
Why don't you try just rebooting your computer first?
I don't think it's the same charge.
It fixes everything.
You're going to use your laptop? All right, so let me pull it off of the flash. I'm so sorry, everybody. Give me 1 sec. I'll be right back.
Right?
Hey, John.
You saved me. You always good to have a library.
You're right. We can solve any.
Thank you so much.
Oh, get it.
Well, yeah, no, not so fast. Don't be too happy because something may happen again.
Who's the lucky charm?
One never knows. Let's see what happens if I press it with good hands. Boys. I was ready to do a little soft shoe. I'll do anything to keep the conversation going. You just walk down the hallway and look at the art. That can happen.
Okay. You're always entertaining.
Oh, please. Even when I'm sweating up in front of
We
a
love you.
handful of
Your
people.
groupies are here tonight.
Thanks, Rob.
Well, Elizabeth, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is,
Why didn't I bring my charger?
Oh, good.
so who can afford education in, for example, a place like Malawi? Is it just what, I would imagine they don't have a real bona fide middle class, but is it only the upper class that can afford
I don't think
school?
that's true. I mean, I think that it's, well, in Malawi, I think, aren't they dealing with the after effects of that cyclone right now? But I think that, from what I've understood, that that it's more of a choice to put the money into young men and their education than it is a question of really not being able to afford it. In a lot of areas. Yeah.
I can say that when I was in Senegal in 2014, so 5 years ago, it was a big change from 2010, the first time I was there, because it was a government program to encourage people to give education to their young women. And because it was a government program, every village that you came to had this poster that said something like, I send my daughter to school. And I do think it's had an
It's had an effect. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, we looked recently at it's a 1995 film, These Girls Are Missing, and it's all about women, young girls not going to school and suddenly falling out of middle school and not passing their next level and their next level. But it has improved. I'm very good that's true. On the right, the one that as I was vamping and Eli was saving the day, on the right is the young woman who's 18 now, OUMA, who's from the Senegalese village, Medina Diamberi, who had been arranged for marriage, and her parents said at 14 you're ready, and she said I'm not, so they're still waiting. And on the left is a little 6-year-old who's benefiting already from this, whose name is Kajia Jatu Drame, who's also in the Senegalese village. On the left, again, you see these are photographs from the Grandmother Project website themselves, and on the right is what Anne was describing, the sort of under the tree, which people gather under the tree because it's cooler there, and talking to the elders across generations. So I kind of made this into little chapters like a story. That was my plan. And I didn't tell Dilip I was going to use that photograph. When we first started talking, so I talked to Anne, I met Anne probably around the time I met you, the two of you, and it was Sheila Chinkle, who's on our advisory board, who introduced us. I'm so glad she did. And we all started talking about the collection, but I didn't realize how vast it was. So it was a collection without an end, for stories without an end, and we could not narrow it down for a very long time, and for good reasons. So I'm very grateful to our OUMA board member, Sheila Chinkle, for that introduction and for a lot of work that she's done. So many of our board members, Dr. Lutz as well, many people who've done a lot of work to support this museum. So over 3 years, we really talked about what we could do. We reviewed hundreds of objects, just to leave one of the objects, and we began to narrow that focus as we looked at Grandmother Project and started focusing on West and Central Sub-Saharan Africa. And looking at objects that celebrated the many stages of life for females, from girlhood all the way through to the spirit realm. So some of that you can see, okay, on the right, how difficult this was to narrow down. This is just a tiny little bitty fraction of a number of things that Dilip and Marty pulled off of shelves and out of places for us to consider. And we were overwhelmed in the best possible way. We began to narrow it down. We chose the Efe Gelede mask, which is Yoruba from Nigeria, as the lead image. And that Gelede is a really joyful Yoruba tradition, celebrating women in all their different capacities in society, particularly women as they transition from productive motherhood into another stage of life. And the intention of Gelede is to both amuse and educate and inspire you. So that's why she's smiling. And she's also, it's a mask that's actually a crown. You wear it on top of your head and you look through the pieces that hang below. It comes from, Efe means, the name is a name of the firstborn child of an Orisha named Yamoja. And Efe means humorist or joker. And Yamoja's second child was a girl nicknamed Gelede because she was plump like her mama, the goddess Yamoja. And just like their mother, neither Efe nor his sister Gelede were able to initially have children until a ritual was performed. And that's part of the Gelede tradition. And a lot of these traditions that deal with fertility come from, I wore a particular sculpture, I wore a particular something, I held a particular, and it worked. So the word begins to spread. So when you think about the Grandmother Project and you think about that government, was it in Senegal, the government
Yes.
sponsored it's inspiring people saying, I've kept my girl in school. Well, that is a very African way of getting the word around. This has worked for me, it may work for you, right? So then on the right you see that Efe Gelede from the back, and several other objects, many of which made it into the exhibition to give you a sense of the scope of this grand collection, which is several thousand pieces of art. And of those, we selected 52 objects, 28 are from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, I had not intended to go into so much depth about the collection itself before I heard Amanda Hellman's talk. Amanda was chosen as our lead curator for this exhibition. But she spoke really more about women and leadership in her discussion, which left it wide open to me to really focus on a couple of pieces in the collection before I talk about Sunday. So on the right you see some of the 52 objects. Of the 52 objects, there are 28 that are from the Democratic Republic of Congo, including those 3 Luba stools. And on the left is a Mengbetu figurative vessel. I had a kind of amusing thing happen that I've told a number of people on the tour, and I love to tell this. 4 days before the exhibition opened, Melody Rogers in Career Services had a wonderful Women of Color in the Workforce event here at Oglethorpe. And she heard about this, and I heard about her event, and she said, we'll have a cocktail hour here. And she said, well, please come and introduce the exhibition and tell everyone about all of the women artists. And I said, Melody, I've got a problem because women do not carve. So we don't have any women artists except for the women who probably made this Mangbetu figurative vessel, because women work with clay and women generally work with cloth as well and do weaving. Men do the carving and men do the metalwork. So the little figure on the left is called a nembo. It's a little pot with a kind of a conventional pot shape, but a woman's head on the top, with kind of traditional elongated head and a decorative head dressing. And that's a very traditional pot, the nembo for the Mangbetu. Oh yeah, please. Of course.
On the the lady, now, would a woman be able to wear that? Or, I know in the men day, the women can wear the masks.
Right.
But normally, even if it's to represent a woman,
Right.
men wear it.
That's absolutely true, right. I think there are some other female societies, but the only one that I know of that's most prominent is the Sunday Bondo Society that's associated with the Mende and others in that region that I will talk about,
Thank you.
even though I'm giving a long preamble.
Sorry.
But you're absolutely right. You're stealing my thunder. No, it's totally right. So women don't do the carving and women don't wear the masks, but men are upholding and celebrating womanhood.
Women are critiquing.
Women are what? Say again?
Women are critiquing the men.
Critiquing. Women are critiquing.
They may just not like that.
And I hope you, and don't be critiquing me too harshly, because as I said a number of times, I'm not an Africanist, but I roll up my sleeves and I really get into it with some of these talks.
You said in the right, we could see
Yes.
the back of that mask, but
See the colorful part there? It's right here. The back of the head. And it's just, a jumble of things that we were looking at. A Mosi figure, an Ghana figure, all sorts of another Nigerian figure. We were just sorting through, thousands of things. What do we do? We could do this, we could go in this direction, that direction. Okay. So Amanda Hellman, who is the African curator at the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University, agreed to come on board to narrow this focus, which we couldn't seem to narrow. And she lit upon the 52 traditionally carved African works, which represent more than 25 ethnic groups and 12 countries. The 12 countries are Mali, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Cameroon, Gabon, DRC, and Tanzania. And she also organized them into 6 themes. And as you walk through the exhibition, those themes are, first there's the center gallery, which is not organized by theme, but is a number of collectors' favorites and other pieces that didn't quite fit into the theme. And then as you move through the Rubin, it's idealized youthful beauty. It's really from birth to death. So idealized youthful beauty, the power of women in motherhood, fertility, nursing mothers and maternity, women in governance, the priestess and receptacle of power, and ancestors. What you see on the right is one that's in the section Idealized Youthful Beauty, and then it's I never say it quite right, so I'm going to be careful here, an Agbogo Mwal, there we go, Agbogo Mwal, which is an Igbo mask from Nigeria, and it's rubbed with kaolin clay, the same sort of clay that's used to make porcelain. It depicts a young maiden spirit. And like you mentioned, that is a beautiful young maiden spirit. It's a mask worn by men. Men who will dress to show that they're very young, lovely maidens, but not worn by women. Why am I going to talk about this guy? Okay. No, I'm going into the next chapter. William Siegman, who died in 2011, was curator of African art at the Brooklyn Museum. He was one of the foremost African curators in the country and arguably around the world. He had a long-standing and deeply personal connection to Liberia and also to Sierra Leone. He had such a long-standing connection that started when he was in the Peace Corps, in the 1960s in Liberia that he connected with a family, and they, for all intents and purposes, adopted him and considered him part of their family. He taught at Cuttington University. He founded the Africana Museum there. He went back to Liberia to pursue research from 74 to 76, which was supported by a Fulbright scholarship, a Fulbright Hayes Fellowship, excuse me. And then he came back and settled in Tenafly, New Jersey, of all places, to become curator of the Museum of the Society of African Missions. And then he also was at the Fine Art Museum of San Francisco from 79 to 84. And after that time, from 84 to 87, I'm not entirely sure where he was, but in 87 he became the curator of African and Oceanic art at the Brooklyn Museum. He was there for 20 years. It was during that time that he worked in the Brooklyn Museum that he acquired over 1,600 objects for the museum. And you'll see in this photograph several of the Sowe masks that we will talk about that are Mende and other groups, Mende Society and other groups, from his collection. This is showing almost a full raffia costume. You'll see others. And then here he is, probably in the early 70s, in Liberia, inspecting Sunday masks at the National Museum of Liberia. It's a very long photograph that I cropped down, showing probably 30 different masks. It's a fabulous photograph. He was awarded another, so I do know where he was from 84 to 87. In 84, he was awarded another Fulbright scholarship, and he went back to Liberia. And then he was the director of the National Museum of Liberia, which you see there. And he oversaw the renovation of the museum's 19th century building and an expansion and reinstallation of the collections. There was an exhibition organized after his death, and I've got the book that accompanies this. Dilip introduced me to this, and I've since bought, I think, 4 different copies to sell at the bookstore, keep forever, mark up myself, and just love and sleep, under my pillow. And this was organized by the Minneapolis Institute of Art. It toured to the National Museum of African Art in 2014, and then it was at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and then it went to Indiana University, and then it came to the High. Bill was an incredible person, and like I said, for 20 years, from 87 to 2007, he was this curator, and I studied with him, not really knowing how lucky I was. So about halfway through his tenure at the Brooklyn Museum, I took a course when I was at Pratt in the late 1990s that was taught by him, and taught at both Pratt and in the Brooklyn Museum. Some of the recollections I have from that experience: the class text that he told me I had to have was Christopher Roy, which is still an incredible tome. He made us go to an incredible bookstore. I don't know if it still exists, but I have a feeling Dr. Lutz would know, called the ONA, Oceanie Afrique Noire, on 39th Street in New York. A bookstore that so impressed me that I kept the receipt for the last 20 years. I've kept it forever. He also told me, when I said I had an avid interest in Dogon culture and Kanaga masks, he said we have some very good ones at the Brooklyn Museum, but the best one in the city is at the Met. You have to go. So I went there, and I filled, and I may have had maybe 2 conversations with him, because his course was packed with about 70 students. I filled at least 2 notebooks, not just with notes, but in the margins with sketches and details and all the nuance of texture and subtlety of carving. He was an expert in Sunday, and he was a connoisseur who encouraged us to let the objects speak to us. So we had to look at all these little details, and not just one, but compare one to the next, to the next, to the next, to see subtleties of carving and try to understand ourselves. Did it come from this particular carving tradition or that carving tradition? But I really didn't know. Not until several years later that I was in the presence of one of the foremost historians of African art. I know now. And it was in Professor Siegmund's class that my love of Guinea Coast style really began. And that includes the ethnic groups of the Dan, the Diomande, the Mende, and others west of the Bandama River who speak the Mande languages. They also share a history of migration toward the coast. It was in Bill's class that I first heard about the Mende Bundu spirit helmet masks worn by middle-aged women to celebrate the entrance of younger women into adult society. So in this little tribute to Bill Seatman, there's a photo I've got of him. This is when he was a bit younger than when I met him, with Mayor David Dinkins and Brooklyn Museum Director Robert Buck in 1992. Finally, we're going to talk about what you thought I was going to talk about. Now we're to that part. So the Sande or Bondu Sande Society is a women's society primarily found in the areas of Sierra Leone, but it also extends into northwestern Liberia and to the edges of Guinea and into the forest regions of Guinea, to the fringe of that. In the north, the ethnic groups, which include the Temne, Limba, Kuranku, Loko, Bulum, Bom, and Kisi, call the society Bondu, or Bondu. I tell you, there was at least 2 historians that I read in detail about this who said it's not Bondo, it's not Bundu, it's not, and they went through very, very carefully explaining, I'm not sure to what end exactly, but that it must be pronounced Bondo. That is what it is in the north. So it's Bondo is the Women's Association. In the southeast, the ethnic groups include the Mende, Kono, Kim, Vai, De, Basa, Gola, Kapele, Bele, Gabandi, and Loma. It's worth mentioning here, there are more than 7,400 different ethnic groups in Africa. If you wondered how many there might be, it's vast. It's just absolutely vast. And of course they cover, the boundaries of those ethnic groups are not the same as the boundaries of the countries, which are largely a fallout of colonialism. In those southeastern groups, they use the term Sande. So in the north, it's Bondo, in the south, it's Sande. It's sometimes said the helmet mask used by these female association represents a spirit, but it should be noted that the highest spirit in this region is not considered to be seen materially. So there's a lot of secrecy to this society. There's a lot that you know, and there's a lot that you don't know, that you're not permitted to know. So here's a map of Africa showing ethnographic and linguistic groups. That's how it's divided rather than by post-colonial countries. All the African countries, with the exception of Ethiopia, to my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, were briefly, where there was a brief occupation by Italy. All of the other countries were under colonial rule at some time. But this map gives you a better sense of the natural divisions of the continent along ethnic and tribal lines. And so the area we're going to focus on is over here, for the most part. And you remember the areas that we looked at that are represented in this exhibition are sub-Saharan, mostly into this region. So we're looking at the Sande or Bondu Society in western coastal regions of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and to a lesser extent, Guinea. So, what we have on the left are 2 Sande initiates who are seated between 2 leaders of the society. And over on the right, you see one of the leaders is holding one of those solar helmets. You don't typically see it this way. This is a moment of rest. But the leaders of the society will wear those masks usually when the initiates are not present and are in seclusion in the forest. And you also don't typically see initiates smiling. You see initiates looking very serious. The masks themselves look very serious. If you've gone in to look at the Soe mask, it's got very tight-lipped. It's unlike me entirely. It's not loquacious. You are meant to be seen and be lovely and very quiet and demure. So when Mende women, we focus on Mende, when they reach puberty, they start the initiation process into society. It's a secret society again, and the goals are to teach women the responsibilities of adulthood. So some of those harmful practices will happen and still do happen, but girls are also taught how to be modest, how to be respectful of their elders, how to be a good wife, how to survive in the forest, how to cook, all sorts of things about childbirth and life as an adult. And the Sande spirit is really the guardian of women and their protector and guide through life. I've got a quote here because I found it a little bit difficult to swallow because I think this may or may not be the case still, But one of the historians that I read indicated that Mende women love the Sunday, celebrate it, treasure it, pass it down through generations. They may love it and treasure it, but there's still some problems with it. And so I think we're seeing some changes now, right? The positive ideals are about social relationships, women in community, women together in sisterhood, and the spirit of togetherness. I found a lot of historic references to Bondo and Sunday as well. On the left is actually Temne initiates, and that's a more recent photograph. There is a period of time when they come out of the forest, they're brought in with their leader, they come out of the forest, and they're meant to act awkwardly. There are all these different layers of them being taught, and when they come back out of the forest, they're wearing a certain outfit. Sometimes they're wearing white and they're covered with tail and clay, and they're meant to just be awkward and sort of genderless. And then another time they'll come out of the forest and they're meant to be dressed beautifully and dance until they've passed each one of these initiation rites. So you see them on the left acting kind of awkwardly and maybe genderless, I don't know. From a Western standpoint, they just look like girls wearing white paint. But from a Temne standpoint, I guess they look like they're being a little bit masculine and a little bit awkward. On the right is a detail of a 1905 photograph by Alfonso Silvestre Lisco Carew, who photographed girls in Sierra Leone. And I've got a quote from him, so let me just find that. Okay, so they were, I think at this time, people were not quite sure what the photography was about, and it's kind of interesting because it feels a bit exploitive here, but on the other hand, the initiates and their leader were willing subjects of the photography. But at the same time, this photographer, Liz Carew, said that they weren't permitted to go back into the village. That would be scandalous. But somehow it felt okay for them to be photographed by a Westerner. It was just outside of the realm of what they were doing. So he said that he went to photograph them and they all prostrated themselves on the ground. He said this long row of young girls, this is a quote from the photographer from 1905, prostrated themselves on the ground in a supplicant attitude with arms upstretched. I can only say that to me it was the most impressive service, and it was certainly regarded by the initiates as a very serious ceremony. At the conclusion, my thanks and offerings followed, and I witnessed the girls' departure with their custodians back into the dense forest to return to their isolated encampment, which is as secure and sacred from the outside world as it can possibly be. And while they were lying there, they were singing. They were lying flat on the ground, singing morning and evening hymns in Mende language. This is also a photograph, an historic photograph. I have too many papers. By Alfonso Liscaru from 1914. And this one shows the initiates all wearing white and acting awkwardly and genderless. And off to the right is their leader, who's going to take them quickly back into the forest. This is the initiates in the next phase, when they come back into the village and they dance. They're wearing dancing costumes. Soon after this phase, they're permitted to re-enter society as marriageable women. And they're still often wearing the white on their faces. And you can see that they're emulating the Soe mask. They're looking serious. They have their mouths very tight. They have a very high headdress or hair piece. And they've emphasized the height of their foreheads, just like the Mende or the Soe mask. This is a more contemporary photograph showing initiates behind older women. Again, it's middle-aged women who are leading the initiates, who will wear the Soe mask. And the Soe mask again represents the Sunday spirit, the spirit of Sunday. And one of the things that's really important about this masking tradition is that they are covered with this raffia, or this blackened palm fronds, and they must cover every single inch of their skin. So they've got covering on their hands, wrists, arms, feet, all things are covered so that the spirit doesn't escape through their flesh in any way. It's all covered over. These are 5 Mende Sunday maskers from the Kenema district in Sierra Leone. This is the mask that we have on view. And that's from Dilip and Marty's collection. So what about all these different styles of masking and carving? Historian John Frederick Lamb has in his 40-year career identified at least 94 different carving workshops in the Guinea Coast style just for the Soe mask. And for the Sande and Bondo Society. And many of these were initially identified by my old professor, Bill Siegman, who gave them playful descriptions such as the master of the raccoon eyes or the master of the crescent eye line. And this beautiful Soe mask has many features of the latter carving house. So let me take a look at this.
And about what time period would that have been created?
Late 19th century. So the master of the crescent eye line, which this may be, now Dilip and Marty may say, no, it doesn't, that was very nice to try, but you're wrong. Just let me know after we talk. It seems like it has many of those hallmarks, and there are many subtle differences between these masks. But some of the distinguishing features include a particularly bulbous forehead with a deep crease in which the eyes are set, a small chin, a deep compression of the neck rings toward the front, and an opening of them toward the back. Fondue marks, the scarification, and tear scarification, which are 3, well in this case 4, but 3 vertical marks on the cheeks. Sometimes little horns on the side of the mask that symbolize protective medicine. And there can be cowrie shells, and as I was examining this more closely, I see that there are tiny holes in the ears of this mask, which may or may not have had shells in them as well. And a hairstyle with 3 ridges that end in bulbous forms is another old style of this particular carver. So it seems like it's got a lot of those hallmarks. The ideal of womanhood with her fine features are present in the Soe mask also always include this series of neck rolls. And many historians have written about these. There have probably been more theses written about this area in African art than any other area. At least 5 PhD theses have happened about this particular mask. And historians have posited that those represent something like neck rolls to show a plump and fertile woman, or they may represent the spirit of Sande herself rising up out of the water with concentric circles coming around her, or they could represent what is my favorite interpretation, particularly on this, the first day of spring, the emerging of a young girl from childhood into womanhood, just as a butterfly emerges from a chrysalis. So I will leave that to you to decide as the story continues. Any questions? I'm sorry about the little technical difficulty, but I'm glad we made it through. Yes, sir.
With the white paint or the material they put on their faces, is that just to disguise them, or is that they're thinking white is better than their regular skin tones? Is that something with colonialism, or is that just they're painting themselves in a different color?
Well, with the Igbo mask, the Nigerian Igbo mask, I know the white is supposed to represent a spirit, and often the white on kaolin clay used on masks is meant to represent a spirit. But in this instance, I think it has to do with innocence or purity. But I would defer to Dilip on this. Do you know what the white may represent?
White also represents death.
It could also be spirit and death.
Ancestors. So it's both.
So it's youth and innocence and death. Other questions? Yes, hi, Randy. How are you? I'm very well.
Do you know where they keep the masks when they're not using them? Is there a woman who's in charge of storing them?
I don't know definitively, but I know that they're only handled by the middle-aged women who wear them. And I know that the figures appear when the girls are sequestered. So they'll come back into the society to remind everyone what's happening off in in the forest. But I don't know where they actually store
So do
them.
they need to keep making them like now? Is
They
really
do.
somebody making them
They do
now?
still make them, and then of course there's a lot of tourist trade objects that are out there. Yeah, sure. Let me tell you all too about what's coming up. Off my lecture hat, put on my marketing hat for a second. Here we go. So let's see, March 24th, that's this Sunday. If you would like to come to a concert that is going to be incredibly beautiful and well attended, get here early. It starts at 4. It's a special chamber performance by 6 musicians from the ASO. And we're offering it free. It's free in honor of Women's History Month and International Women's Day. And it's going to be packed. It will be in here. So it'll be first come, first seated. We're not taking tickets. We're not doing reserve. So we'll have one student posted here to greet happy people, and we'll have one downstairs to give away free tickets to sad people because we can't exceed capacity. So that's going to be Sunday, and I hope you come.
How often do they do the ceremony? Is it yearly?
I don't know, actually.
Or like when you get enough women to?
I don't know, given that it's for all girls who reach puberty. I'm not sure how often it happens.
This is when they are graduating,
Yeah.
so it is almost an annual.
Is it annual because everyone's going to reach puberty at a different time? But we'll stay open for a little bit if you want to go and take another look at the Soe Mass.
I have a question. What kind of homes do they live in? I mean, is it like what you picture in Africa, which to me would be thatch roof something, or?
Well, these are small villages within this whole Guinea coastal region. So some of them are, thatched roof kind of structures. This is not a urban community.
Well,
None
yeah, I
of them are.
figured
Right,
that.
right.
Elizabeth, so what is their practice of religion? It might be an ignorant question, but personally in the 90s, we had a nanny in DC that really helped to raise my older daughter, who left Sierra Leone and she came on a Christian mission.
Okay.
And there was this, and was in DC.
Okay.
So Mark could never run for president because it was, not a legal thing. But the point is that it was more of the Christian mission. So I was just curious this is of course a very ritualistic, but do they practice a religion beyond
In Sierra
the
Leone,
culture?
I think that Jay Lutz is going to know much more than I do about
What do you
this,
think, Dr. Lutz?
Because I do not know. In that region?
I don't know.
Okay.
The one thing that occurs to me is that what one sees over and over again in Africa is a mixing of traditions
True.
and a willingness to accept different
Right.
traditions
Curious.
Yeah,
without conflict.
Right.
when we looked at the film that was about the Yoruba carver Olamide Fayeke, he himself is Muslim, he was led in a lot of his carving practices by a Christian priest who made suggestions of what he could do. And
Right.
you want to carve this, you may want to carve that. So I think, and you see that also when you see Orisha, and those practices that are sublimated into, that are hello there, that are brought over from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean, and maybe mixed with Christian traditions. Right?
I know
I think
that
Alice telling us it's time to go.
I spoke to many Senegalese who were very proud of the tradition of tolerance and willingness to welcome the other. And they spoke of that not just in terms of the country of Senegal, but of West Africa. They talked about that as a West African tradition. And then, in talking, I'd point out, some of the, violent conflicts and the things that happen in Africa, in West Africa, that aren't particularly tolerant. And the answer I'd get, which I thought was really interesting, was they're going against the tradition. That's not really, that's not us. That's something that's come from somewhere else or is, going against what we really stand for.
Thank you all very much.